Henry, just before the break, you were talking about Rockefeller, and I think you used the phrase a psychological psyop, using sex education, not for the purpose of educating, but if I had to read into what you were saying, for the purpose of indoctrinating a generation?
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole character of the last 100 or even 150 years, certainly my lifespan since 1960, it's been the prominent theme in the media, in music, in movies, has been to encourage sexual promiscuity. And that it's been a huge, we have no idea that this has been sold to us as a form of liberation and freedom of self-expression, but it's had an incredible effect in terms of making us obsessed with sex, making marriage break down so that we can't even get sex because we're not in a marriage. So as a result, we're twice as obsessed with sex. And everything has been lowered to this lowest common denominator where everybody is judged on mostly on their sexual attraction. So, you know, you're either hot or you're not, and if you're not hot, you don't count. So you've got teenage girls think their whole value now is wrapped up in their sex appeal. It's been a very effective way of degrading the humanity on a massive scale.
Wow. Now, how does this tie into the Illuminati? And if I'm correct in understanding the thesis of your book, that there's a plan to create a new world order, how does sexuality and degrading the individual and society as a whole factor into this?
Well, essentially, it's their view of humanity. They deny God, and therefore they deny that human beings have a spark of divinity in them. They see human beings as cattle, animals that can be trained as animals are trained, you know, and essentially they're training us to be subservient to them.
Now, I understand the idea of, you know, if I've got all the money, or if I own all the resources, I can rise up to become a king, a dictator, an emperor. But where does this idea of human beings as cattle come from? I mean, that you made a statement that on the surface sounds far-fetched.
Well,
you know, I mean, I think we can.
I hate to say this because I'm Jewish myself.
Okay.
But most Jews aren't aware of. Most Jews, I can vouch for this. Most Jews have never read the Talmud, which is the central book of Judaism today, and always has been. But if you do look at the Talmud, it contains the view that non-Jews are cattle, and that's what they're called goyim. And essentially, the central banking cartel, which is behind the Illuminati, which is not exclusively Jewish, I can go into that. They believe in intermarrying with other generational Satanists, so it's more satanic than Jewish. But in any case, they do have the view that the mass of humanity is no better than cattle.
Okay. You know, on the
that in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is a book everybody should read 5 or 6 times. You benefit from it every time you read it.
You know, I've got a huge library, and I've got a copy of the Protocols in the house. I'll be candid, I've never read it. My father handed it down to me. My take on the Protocols is that it is in the line of books of Machiavelli's The Prince. That's how I understand Protocols.
Peter, it's been surrounded. It's essentially, first of all, it's the current version we've got dates from a roughly 1870, 1880, 1890, that period. became public around 1904.
Right.
It essentially revealed the Illuminati plan in its latest rendition, and they had to do damage control on a major scale to prevent people from reading that book. So they surrounded it with a huge stigma that this book is horribly anti-Semitic, and that if you look at it, you're the equivalent of a Nazi.
Right.
And but in fact, if you read the book, it's not anti-Semitic at all. It's really it's anti-humanity, and this logic. There's no logic in saying it's anti-Semitic because it was written by the secret leadership of the Jews. The Jews aren't aware of this leadership. They're manipulated by them, or they're indifferent to them. But this is just a group of Masonic Jewish bankers meeting in secret and putting together their own megalomaniacal plans.
Okay, you're making some pretty. You're making some fairly
legitimate right to say they represent the Jewish people.
Okay.
The plans are totally secret.
I got it. You're making some fairly serious allegations. I grew up with Jews. I know Hebrew. I can read and write Hebrew, and I can read the prayer book and parts of Genesis in Hebrew. I'm not an expert in it, and I've actually studied Talmud as well. I am a Christian, okay, and I'm familiar with what's in the Talmud, and I understand what you're saying. But let's just back up. You've made some fairly serious allegations. Do you have evidence to support the claims?
Well, if you've read the Talmud, you know what it contains.
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was speaking, before we started talking, my brother was on the phone with me, refreshing my memory about the National Endowment for the Arts funding of the Piss Christ exhibit. I believe it was somewhere in New York. And I didn't get a chance to talk with my brother in detail about it, but this idea of Piss Christ, in my mind, it's right out of the Talmud, because I've read it with my own eyes.
Exactly. They talk about Jesus drowning in...
boiling in excrement.
Drowning in excrement, yeah.
Yes, I've read it. I've read it in Hebrew.
Yeah, and the central theme of Freemasonry, which is essentially Kabbalah, which is essentially an instrument of these crazed, sociopathic bankers that run the world, is the destruction of Christianity. They regard Christianity as their single most important obstacle to their tyranny.
Why? Why Christianity? Is it because of the prohibition against lending at interest?
No. I think Christianity generally, as expressed in the New Testament, is wholesome. And it holds up a vision of human brotherhood, and it holds up a vision of everybody sharing in a kind of divinity equally.
Right.
And this is something. This is something that is antithetical to their outlook.
All right, well, let's back up. Let's deconstruct this one layer further. The guys that are into Talmud and Kabbalah are rabbis, and not all of them. It's either the very Orthodox or the Hasidic, and some of the other sects that fall into that. Most of the Jews I know are either secular or they're Reform or conservadox. And they only go to services on the high holy days. That's about it. It's kind of like a...
90%, I'd say 90% of Jews don't have a clue about Judaism.
I agree with you. All right, but what's the connection between the rabbis who are the keepers of this literature, the Talmud, the Mishnah, the Gemara, and the Kabbalistic works, and the bankers. What's the connection?
They're sort of intermediaries, just like politicians, or like college professors who teach political science,
right,
or historians. They're spin doctors. So they basically deal in kind of homilies, feel-good homilies, keep the people in the dark. Whether they themselves are deluded, it depends on the rabbi.
Okay.
That's the way I see them.
All right. Wow. All right. So you're using a fairly strong word. The word is Satanism, and for the listeners, the word means adversary, and Satan is the adversary of God and of humanity. But what's the connection with illumination or Illuminati? However, they came up with this word Illuminati.
Well, they essentially turn everything on its head. So for them, darkness is light and light is darkness.
Okay.
So they call themselves Illuminati, and they call it the Enlightenment. And they call Lucifer the son of the dawn, and they use the sunrise as their logo.
Right.
That little swoosh we see everywhere is the sunrise. But it's really, everything is reversed, and that's how we have to realize we're really entering into a kind of twilight. We're entering into a darkness, but it's being portrayed to us as a dawn. We're entering into the night, but it's portrayed as the dawn.
I remember a Chabad rabbi telling me that before the Jewish Messiah appears, this is not Jesus Christ, that there would be an era of confusion where we would not be able to easily discern between good and evil, right and wrong, light and darkness, and that would be one of the signs that the Jewish Messiah was about to appear.
Yes, it's very frightening because it's becoming one of these prophets, these crazed Kabbalists are bringing it about. They're causing the chaos, they're causing the destruction, all because they think it's going to result in their New World Order. The whole doctrine of the Kabbalah is based on destruction being a prerequisite for creation.
Right.
And in practical terms, that means destroying Western civilization.
Wow. Henry, great to talk. Let's pick up next time.
Okay.
You've been listening to On the Money with Peter Hebert. Thanks for tuning in. Always remember, the most important economy of all is yours. And the best mortgage is the one that's paid off.